You must be truly desperate to come to me for help.
I need an interesting character for my story, and I'm running out of ideas. Hello, friends! My name is Elizabeth, and today I thought it would be interesting to explore the many-faceted world of morally gray characters. First off, a definition. According to Andrews University, a morally gray character is someone who is neither good nor bad. Fine, understandable. Morally gray characters are not motivated by good or bad actions, but are instead motivated by their own personal ambition. And that is the part that I think a lot of people enjoy about morally gray characters. But it can also be something that writers focus too heavily on when they're crafting their characters, which can lead to them creating characters that feel more like caricatures rather than like full complex people. It can also lead to audiences calling characters that follow their own internal sense of morality morally gray, even if that internal moral code deviates significantly from the standard acceptance of right and wrong. You know, a villain who has their own moral code is still a villain if they're actively working to achieve violent, oppressive, or selfish goals. They're not automatically morally gray, at least to me. So for me, calling characters morally gray just because they are motivated by their own goals rather than a sense of right and wrong feels like an incomplete or even lackluster definition of what morally gray really means, since a lot of those characters act, for all intents and purposes, as villains. So just call them villains. It's kind of led to a muddying of the waters when it comes to what actually is a morally gray character. If your villain has a tragic backstory, are they morally gray? If your protagonist is motivated by vengeance or vanity, are they morally gray? You know, it gets murky in there, and then morally gray starts to lose its meaning. It gets to the point where really any character that has flaws and dreams and isn't black and white can be labeled as morally gray. Which isn't necessarily wrong, but it has made the term morally gray to have very little meaning most of the time. You know, are there any true hallmarks of a morally gray character? That's kind of what I'd like to get into in this video. You know, when you think of morally gray, are you thinking of a playful drunk, a traumatized assassin, a trickster king? Is likability necessary? If you have a likable villain, are they automatically morally gray? If your protagonist is motivated by something other than righteous honor, are they automatically morally gray? You know, it's a murky landscape, and I'm not sure if there are any true, concrete hallmarks of a morally gray character, simply because everyone who isn't black and white is technically morally gray. And that's literally everybody on Earth. Which is not very useful when you're writing a novel. So, with that in mind, I like to think of morally gray characters as those characters that are hard to love, but harder to hate. They don't have to be likable, but if they aren't likable, they need to be sympathetic. And if they aren't sympathetic, then they need to be likable. For me, at least, this is just me, you know, me spouting myself into the little corner of the internet. You don't have to take this advice. I'm just saying what I think. Because I can, because I'm alone in my room with my camera. So here we go. Basically, a morally gray person, to me, is someone who will lie, cheat, and steal in order to do blank. Whatever it is that they're trying to do. That is your morally gray character. But they have to be willing to lie, cheat, and steal, or worse, to achieve whatever that is. They're not making their decisions based off of right and wrong. They're willing to lie, cheat, and steal, or worse. And on top of that, the audience has to understand why they want what they want. They might not agree, but they have to understand. Maybe their dog was killed, or their ship was stolen, or their wife was kidnapped. You know, they're not just motivated by greed or power like a typical villain. They got some kind of reasoning behind their actions. For example, Katniss Everdeen could be described as morally gray because she isn't really motivated by the idea of freedom for all people. And she really doesn't want to be a symbol of the revolution who righteously desires to take down the Capitol. She just wants her family to survive. And ultimately, she wants to be left alone. Katniss can be mean, quick-tempered, and accusatory, and is often described by readers as an unlikable protagonist. But the audience is also able to empathize with her plight and her goals, so she is a sympathetic protagonist. Versus someone like Captain Jack Sparrow. He could also be described as morally gray because he's mainly motivated by his own whims and desires. In the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, he initially helps Will try to find Elizabeth because she is on his ship, the Black Pearl. And he wants that ship back. His plight isn't necessarily righteous. He might not be a sympathetic character, but he is a likable character. He is playful and funny and self-deprecating. He is also smart and uses his smartness to make other people think that he's not as smart as he is. You know? He's witty and we respect that. He may not have the most righteous goals, but he doesn't act in a fully malicious way either. He's a goofy pirate and we like him. I also like to split morally gray characters into two categories when I'm thinking about them, and that would be delicious and realistic. Delicious characters are the ones most likely to be created by you while you're writing. They're the ones that probably pop into your mind when you think of morally gray characters. They're sort of just to the left of evil. You know, but in a fun way. There's something very appealing and satisfying about characters who don't abide by any external code of morality, whether good or evil, and instead are driven entirely off of attaining their own goals. It scratches some itch that we, as humans, have to just turn our backs on whatever it is that anyone else wants and live in total pursuit of our own desires. It's like vicarious selfishness that I think makes morally gray characters so appealing. These delicious characters are the ones that have legions of fans lusting after them and romanticizing their actions. You know, like a mob boss who has his own set of values that might include death and violence in the ruthless pursuit of physical wealth or notoriety or respect in their name, but also probably includes loyalty to family, fidelity to their spouse, or avenging harmed children. You know, anything like that can create a delicious morally gray character. I think for a lot of writers, the ultimate goal when creating a morally gray character is not so much about creating flawed heroes or likable villains, but is instead about creating a character, neither hero nor villain, that the audience is never truly able to determine whether they are good or bad. They keep you guessing. You keep changing your mind. You think you have them figured out, but then they do something completely selfless or absolutely abhorrent. You can't make a pros and cons list of their actions to determine whether they are more good or bad, because the magnitude of their actions on both sides of the moral dilemma should seemingly cancel everything else out. You know, morally gray characters are often inherently selfish, which makes sense because they are motivated by their own goals and desires, rather than a sense of right and wrong. But I think if you can boil your morally gray character down to simple selfishness, you've still kind of failed a bit as a writer. Or maybe your character is still just lacking something that could make them truly morally gray. And in that case, you might experiment with situations where it would make sense for your character to make a truly selfless decision. What would that look like? How would it need to happen in order to still appear as an authentic decision for your character to make? You know, those can be the types of really interesting questions that you as a writer can play with while creating your morally gray character. I would like to step in here and say that there is sometimes concern from audiences when these types of morally gray characters are all we see in our media, because it can create the sense that all of our fictional role models are just a little left of evil, you know? And what kind of generation might we be raising with only that one specific type of role model? But I don't know, maybe that's a discussion for another day about how much of an influence media really has on people's behaviors and beliefs. You know, is it a writer's duty to create characters that meet audiences where they are in terms of media literacy or critical thinking? I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I don't know the true impact that media has on people. I haven't done studies. I haven't read the studies. But I did want to mention it because it is a concern that some people have when thinking about morally gray characters. So it's just something you might want to be aware of when writing your own morally gray characters. Especially if you're writing for young people, like if you're writing young adult fiction. You know, you're creating role models of some variety. What impact they have, I don't know. It's up to you to decide or to read the studies. I don't know. So, moving on from the delicious character, for a more realistic morally gray character, there is again a range of what that character might be. But this character becomes less of fulfilling that delicious, scandalous role that the previous type of morally gray character filled, and instead tends to take a more serious tone in stories. Up to and including just real, everyday average people, who, when stripped of their glossy character shine, can actually be quite hard to root for, even when they aren't doing anything overtly evil. Or even, like, out of the ordinary. You know, people can be hard to root for. Most of us are morally gray. Not in the sense that we are truly motivated by our own selfish desires during every decision that we make in our lives, but because we're just people. You know, trying to get by, trying not to cause harm, disagreeing on what it means to cause harm, while also trying to be happy ourselves, and rationalizing whatever actions we take to achieve that happiness in order for us to be able to sleep at night. Most people in real life are not consistently motivated by good or evil. They are morally gray. A realistic version, not so much a delicious version. So for me, a good place to begin when writing a morally gray character is to differentiate them from a true villain by making them able to recognize suffering. They'll have to rationalize that suffering in some way in order to achieve their goals, but they have to be able to recognize it. A true classic villain does not even notice when their actions cause harm to others. They're not rationalizing it away. They just don't notice, because they're blindsided by their own greed or lust for power or desire to destroy or anything like that. Whereas a morally gray character will see and maybe even empathize with the suffering caused by their actions, but they have found some way to rationalize it in order to achieve their goals. For me, that's a good starting point when trying to create a morally grey character, in terms of distinguishing them from either a true villain or a true hero. You know, the hero would probably be motivated to act in such a way that reduces suffering, rather than rationalizing suffering caused by their actions in order to pursue their own goals. You know, it's just a good place to think about. Good place to start. Also, because morally grey characters are motivated by their own desires, rather than an internal sense of good and bad, their goals and actions can change over time. You know, a hero always motivated by good. A villain always motivated by evil. Morally grey character, motivations can change. This is especially evident in a series, rather than in a standalone. But it can happen in a standalone. But in a series, the morally grey character can oscillate between the story's main villain or an unwilling accomplice to the hero, depending on which part of the series we're in. For example, in Thor, Loki is the villain. He's motivated by jealousy and a sense of betrayal, and that leads him to not only try to kill Thor, the story's hero, but also to destroy part of Earth. Or maybe even all of Earth, I don't know, which is typical villain behavior. Loki is again the villain in the Avengers. He's motivated by a lust for power. And again, because he feels like his right to the throne was wrongfully taken from him, he's willing to commit incredible acts of violence in order to claim leadership of his own territory, which is what he feels like is his birthright. But in Thor 2, Loki becomes an unwilling accomplice to Thor in his effort to take Jane off of their Asgard place and sneak her out so that she could get healthy again. He schemes with Thor in order to help Jane, and even though the audience fully believes that he's willing to betray Thor, he doesn't. He doesn't take the opportunity to betray Thor. He's simply still in search of his own throne, not motivated by pure evil. And throughout the Marvel Universe, Loki acts like an ally or an aggressor, depending on how the storyline impacts his ability to achieve his own goals. Do you see how it can change depending on where you are in the story? I don't know if I described that well enough for you, but I hope I did. Like all characters, morally grey characters will need unique backstories, personalities, and driving goals. They don't all have to be quippy tricksters or rigid, unfeeling psychopaths. You want to spend time crafting individual identities that make sense within the world of your story, and also lets the reader understand how they came to be morally grey. So, was that a meandering dialogue, or did it make any sense at all? I hope it did. I hope it did. Please like and subscribe.